special time of the year or so that we offer wonderful George Nelson music concert. Tonight is played by our own very musically, professionally gifted organ music artist, Rudy, who's playing the organ at Bethany Church also. Hope you enjoy it in the sense of a blessing of this season. And for our guests tonight, you'll find a restroom at that door and go all the way through and turn your left. Go through the hall and you'll find the restroom. So let us welcome Rudy and let us enjoy the music now. Thank you.
So again, welcome to the George Nelson Memorial Concert Series, once again featuring Dr. Rudy Shackelford. And we're very fortunate here to have Rudy at our church. We get to hear him play every Sunday, and it's a wonderful thing. In your program, you'll also find a bio of Rudy. You probably have already seen it, so when you get a chance, take a look at that. And if you've been here before, you know exactly what to expect. Just a wonderful professional concert. You won't hear a better concert anywhere in the world than what Rudy can provide. And if you haven't been here before, and if you love virtuosity, you will be delighted. Rudy is once again dedicating this performance to the Gloucester Matthews Humane Society and Dr. Richard Crowder, who is going to be with us today, will speak to us at the intermission. And Dr. Crowder is president of the board of directors of the Humane Society. So the way I look at that, that makes him the top dog at the Humane Society. Also, an offering will be collected at the intermission, so we ask you to please dig deep in your pockets. The Humane Society does incredible work, and the doggies and the kittens really would appreciate your offering. Today's program, Enter unto Cesar, is focused on Cesar Franck, who became the most influential composer in France during the last third of the 19th century. And during part two of the program, we'll also hear selections from Bach and Beethoven. So you're also going to hear Rudy's magical situation where he can play both the organ and the piano at the same time. And not many people are capable of doing that, but he can do it. So this afternoon's program opens with Pièce Héroïque, which is the heroic piece, and it was composed as a tribute to the French army who was defeated in 1871 during the Franco-Prussian War. But they considered that being morally victorious, even though they were not completely victorious. This is well known as Franck's best organ piece. So now I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Rudy Shackelford.
privilege to be here this evening to present the music of Cesar Franck because I was first attracted to the organ by Franck's music. Some of you who are record collectors may remember the old Mercury Living Present stereo recordings, and the French organist Marcel Dupré had come over to the United States and recorded a vinyl LP of Franck's music at St. Thomas Episcopal Church in New York City. And when I heard that, I knew I had to play the organ. There was no escaping it. So it was the music of Cesar Franck that, even more than Bach, that drew me to the organ. And this particular piece, now last year, you may, if any were here for our celebration of Beethoven's 250th birthday, delayed a year by the pandemic, but we did manage to do it. And this concert, in some ways, is a sequel to that, because this very piece that we began with is definitely influenced by Beethoven's Third Symphony, the Eroica, both pieces having the subtitle Heroic. We don't know if Franck intended this as a tribute to the defeated French army in the Franco-Prussian War, but it's very possible he did not put a dedication on the score as he did on most of his scores, so we really don't know. But this piece is probably his most often performed work, and you can see why with all the drama that it has. And it's a Beethovenian struggle against darkness and the forces of evil, and then it emerges, goodness and light emerges victorious at the end. Well, the next piece, the Pastoral, is totally different in mood. Like many pastorals, it depicts life in the countryside. And again, we are not sure that Franck was inspired by the account in the Gospel of Luke, with the shepherds abiding in the fields, awaiting the birth of Christ. But the narrative of this piece sort of follows the biblical account. It opens in a very tranquil mood, as you would expect in a country setting, and then suddenly, in the middle of the piece, we have a figure, an agitated figure that could suggest the heart palpitations of the poor shepherds when they saw the angel of the Lord and didn't know what was happening to them. The middle of the piece becomes very agitated. The adrenaline is flowing, and then the angels reassure the shepherds that no harm will come to them, and then the music subsides to the tranquil mood of the opening, with the addition of a beautiful melody in the upper register, which could symbolize the heavenly light. So here is Cesar Franck's Pastoral for organ. That piece is dedicated to the organ builder Aristide Cavai Cole, who built the organ that Franck, that inspired this music and almost all of Franck's organ music. If you look in your program in the inside back cover, you will see a photograph of this organ. It was built shortly after the church itself was built. The Basilica of Saint Clotilde was built in the middle of the 1850s, and Franck took the job as organist there. In 1857, when he was 35 years old, I think he really found his niche. He could have been a world-famous concert pianist. He certainly had the virtuosic ability on the piano to conquer every concert hall, and yet he had a very humble and introverted type of personality, which wasn't really suited to be a concert pianist. So he sort of drifted for a while, composed quite a bit of music, and then when he was appointed organist of Saint Clotilde, he remained there until his death 33 years later. And he spent, I guess, the happiest hours of his life in that organ loft, because apparently his marriage wasn't very happy. So he became a cloistered organist, and that's what suited his personality. And yet, behind the scenes, working behind the scenes with what nowadays people call soft power, he was able to dominate music in France for the next 30 years. And most of the composers, the successful composers, were pupils of his. So that just goes to show you can, even if you carry a small stick, you can make a big impression. So the next piece is the Prelude, Fugue, and Variation. I mentioned with our heroic piece that opened the concert, it was definitely influenced by Beethoven. Well, this piece is certainly an overt homage to Franck's favorite composer, J.S. Bach. Bach, of course, wrote many, many preludes and fugues and variations, and so this piece was originally an organ solo, and then Franck decided to make an arrangement of it for piano and harmonium. Well, the harmonium, from many American parlors at the turn of the 20th century, always had a harmonium, a little portable reed organ that you pumped with your feet. These instruments were also very popular in France, and especially to use as to accompany choirs. The big organ was up in the balcony, but the choir up at the front of the church was usually accompanied by a harmonium. So this became, this version of it may have been undertaken for marketing purposes also, because it allowed this piece to be taken out of the church and into the home parlor, most of which didn't have organs. So Franck had an eye to sales, but also this is a very delightful arrangement of the piece, and I even enjoy playing it more this way than as a solo organ piece. Well, as Claire mentioned, our organ here has the capability of recording what is played on it and then playing back. So that makes it possible to do a duet with oneself, pre-recording the organ part and then playing the piano part. It's a phenomenon you might describe as duet yourself. So we will try this and see what you think of this. Thank you. Now, the bulk of our program, as far as Frank is concerned, will be taken up with his last three works, the three chorales. The titles of these pieces causes some confusion because it's spelled like the English adjective choral, but of course it has no part for choir. It's solo organ. Actually, it refers to the German name for our congregational hymn, a chorale. With Bach, of course, when he wrote music based on chorales, he was using hymns that had been in existence for many years, starting with the time of Martin Luther. But when Franck wrote these three pieces, he invented his own hymn-like melodies that you will hear usually not at the beginning of the piece. The hymn, the chorale part will occur later on, and then it's developed extensively, and at the end of the first chorale, it makes a triumphant appearance similar to the way that the heroic piece at the beginning of the program ended. So the first chorale in E major, all three of these pieces were written, probably not completely originally composed in the last 3 months of Franck's life. He probably had been working on them before, but the final versions of them were really deathbed pieces, and they have come to be considered among the greatest organ pieces ever written. You will not find many concert programs that contain all three, because it's admittedly a heavy lift for the organist and for the listener. These are very serious and complex and profound pieces of music. They are in no sense entertainment music. They are for enlightenment and edification, and if you give your all as a listener to them, I think you will be amply repaid for the effort. The first chorale is the longest of the three. It's 15 minutes long. So without further ado, let's listen to the Franck chorale number 1 in E major.
just wow. Okay, we'll now have a 15-minute intermission, and again, as a reminder, the second time, bathrooms are through this door, down the hallway, turn left, and you'll see them on the right-hand side. So during this time, we'll have an offering, and please keep in mind 100% of the offering goes to the Humane Society. And Rudy has spent many, many hours putting this program together, as you can imagine, and the practice time that he's put in is incredible. So let's dig deep, and as a tribute to Rudy, let's provide some monies to the Humane Society and the dogs and the cats. So now I would also like to introduce Dr. Richard Crowder, again, the top dog at the Humane Society, and he'll update us on what is happening now at the Humane Society. Dr. Crowder.
The older I get, the more I realize how many blessings are bestowed upon each and every one of us every day that unfortunately we often take for granted. Consider this evening. We are here of our own free will, without prohibition or coercion, to enjoy what I would call a sampling of the great music by a virtuoso performer. Dr. Rudy Shackelford is a dear friend, I suspect, of everyone here. And just to have him as a friend is a blessing. I can't imagine the number of years that he has devoted to his profession. It must be mind-boggling when you look at his bibliography and see where he has been and what he has done. And here we are in Gloucester, Virginia with this opportunity. I don't know how many of you know, but Rudy is also an animal lover. Rudy happens to be a cat person. I had the joy of also knowing George Nelson, and I knew him well. I was his last physician. George was also an animal lover, and in fact, George was on the board of directors of the Gloucester Matthews Humane Society. Unfortunately, our time did not overlap, but he was a wonderful man and a dear friend, and that's another one of those blessings that one would often simply take for granted. Being involved with the Humane Society has been a great blessing to me, and it began about 41 years ago when my wife and I came to Gloucester in 1981 to stay. I was here in 77 for a couple of years, went away for several more years of training, and then returned. Had the good sense to know that I was in the land of the life worth living, and if I had to leave, have the good common sense to return. In the last 10 years, I've been very heavily involved since I retired, and I'd like to tell you a bit about the Humane Society. I suspect many of you know something about it, but so just bear with me. Founded in 1910 at Elmington, the Gloucester Matthews Humane Society has been in continual operation for 110 years, making it one of the oldest such organizations in the United States. At its outset, the focus was on cruelty to farm animals. With the changing demographics, the focus changed to companion animals, and this happened in the 50s and 60s predominantly. And by companion animals, of course, I mean cats, dogs, a shout out to the horse people, and the snake people, not so much. GMHS currently takes in about 1,500 animals per year. In fact, it's a few more than that, between 1,500 and 1,700 on average. We have a live release rate of 96%. By that I mean 96% of the animals that come in the front door go out the front door. The 4% that are unfortunate enough not to make that journey are either a danger to society, or they're terminally ill, or have a condition that is painful and cannot be remedied. So that's 1,500 animals. Now, consider this. In the Middle Peninsula, there are about 500 potential homes per year. So we have 1,500 animals, 500 homes, and yet we have a 96% live release rate. Houston, we have a problem. How do we solve that? Well, a few years ago, it was about 8 years ago, we were looking at this and going, what can we do about this? And we hit upon a plan. There was a lady at the shelter, the executive director at that time, Nicola Redmond, who was very innovative. And she said, well, why don't we create a highway to home? Because the further you go north, the fewer companion animals there are in surplus. And in fact, there's a shortage. Now, the reason for that, there are two reasons. One is that a culture of spay-neuter is far more ingrained the further one travels north. The other is that kitten season in the north is much shorter because of the temperature. So there are not as many kittens that are born outside of homes, et cetera. So we developed this network. And over the years, that network has grown to about 50 shelters, and they're all no-kill. I mean, these are vetted. It's why it's taken us 10 years to develop this network. We will take animals from Gloucester and go as far as Burlington, Vermont. We will go as far as Portland, Maine. We will go to Pennsylvania, to Maryland, and this is how this works. I'll share with you a story. This was about 4 years ago. It was December the 22nd. Another volunteer and I left Gloucester at about midnight with 22 kitty cats and traveled to Burlington, Vermont, arriving in a snowstorm at about 11 in the morning. I think that was the time. I may be off an hour or two. We offloaded the kitties and headed south at a high rate of speed, trying to beat the weather, which fortunately we did, returning home to Gloucester at about 5 p.m. on the 23rd of December. By the time we arrived home in Gloucester, all 22 cats had been adopted. So one could say they beat us home for Christmas. That's the beauty, one of the beauties, and one of the few beauties in my world, of the internet. You can send videos, pictures, people know what, people decide on an animal. They may be in Portland, Maine, they decide on an animal over the internet, and the animal arrives a week later and they take it home. As a matter of fact, Portland, Maine is a common port of call because they like pit bulls there, and that's quite frankly a bit of a problem. A lot of people are afraid of them, and I understand that. So we go there rather frequently. The part about it that I don't like is that you're traveling through that northeast corridor, that traffic corridor. And I will tell you, if you have to go through Newark, do it in the middle of the night on the interstate at a high rate of speed. We also have a low-cost spay-neuter clinic that we run at the White Marsh Shopping Center. It's called the Fixin' to Save Spay and Neuter Clinic. It is a cost saving to anybody who chooses. We have folks that come from North Carolina to have their animals fixed there just because it's that much of a savings. In fiscal 2022, 3,871 procedures were done. That was a record. We could do more. It's finding veterinary coverage is tough, but it looks like we're going to be able to increase it, may be able to open from 3 days a week to 4 or even 5 because there's a waiting list. It's a high demand for this. So those are some of the things that we're doing, and I want to tell you a couple of stories in closing. And as Richard Nixon would say, these stories have the added benefit of actually being true. And the first is recent. It was 2 weeks ago. A stray cat was brought into the shelter, And the cat was scanned for a microchip. These microchips are pretty neat. You know, next thing they're going to put a chip in our brain, but they're putting these in kitty cats and dogs. We always put them in when they leave GMHS. If you have a scanner, you can scan and pick up identifying information. So this cat was scanned, cat had a chip, and there was a phone number. Phone number was called. The lady answered the phone. She said, "You're kidding me. I lost Frisky 1 year ago." She came, picked up Frisky, thus a happy ending to Frisky's 1 year most excellent adventure. So, one more. This one was in September, and this was a dog brought in as a stray. Another volunteer and I left Gloucester with this dog at about 2 or 3 in the morning, heading west, arriving in Charleston, West Virginia at 7:10 in the morning, where we met another individual that took Harlow and continued west to Lexington, Kentucky, where tag team number 3 took Harlow and continued west. Harlow arrived home, this was started on a Saturday morning, arrived home late Sunday night in Denver, Colorado. Now, the rest of the story. So Harlow was brought in to GMHS as a stray. She was scanned and had a chip. There was a phone number. The number was called, again, the only ladies answer the phone. A lady answered the phone in Denver, Colorado. She was told that we have Harlow, her dog. She said, "It's not possible, Harlow's dead." And we said, "Au contraire, let us send you a video," which was sent. And she said, "My gosh, that's Harlow." And then she told us why she thought Harlow was dead. You see, 3 years ago, she and her then husband separated. They had 2 dogs. She kept one. Harlow went with the husband to coastal Virginia. Sometime in the intervening period, she was informed by the then ex-husband there had been a home invasion and Harlow had been killed. Well, either the home invader was a bad shot or the ex-husband, had a problem with veracity. At any rate, she sent us a video of Harlow being reunited with her canine brother and her human mother. And all I can say is it was a wagathon on steroids. I want to thank you all for your support. You know, 12% of our budget comes from municipalities. That would be Gloucester, Matthews, and Middlesex. The rest, we have to raise ourselves year over year, and a great deal of that is personal donations. So if it were not for the support of folks in the Middle Peninsula and a few, even Richmond and far away, we either would not be here or we would be a shadow of what we're able to do. So I really do appreciate it, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you.
So now we'll continue with our concert, and we're ready for the second part. And thank you, Dr. Rudy Shackelford.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, there's a difference between the chorale that Frank understood, and you heard one of his beautiful original melodies throughout the chorale number 1. That was his own original hymn. But when Bach wrote chorales or chorale preludes, he was using hymns that had been in existence and that were known to the congregations of the churches. What the function of the chorale prelude was to give the melody out so that the congregation would hear it before it was sung. But Bach was such an artist and such an original person that his chorale preludes turned into much more complicated and intricate things than any congregation could understand or pick up the melody from. I'm going to play one of the most famous ones now. It's colloquially, it's known as Sleeper's Wake. It's the German title is Wachet auf. It comes from the biblical story of the wise and foolish virgins. So I'm going to play Bach originally composed this for the organ, but Ferruccio Busoni, an Italian pianist and composer, made a very beautiful piano transcription of it. You will hear, this is not one of those chorale preludes which disguise the melody beyond recognition. You will hear the melody, but Bach has added such an interesting counter melody to it that you almost forget about the original hymn melody because it's so interesting what he's done to it. So after I play the chorale prelude, then I will just play one verse of the actual hymn that Bach used to create this masterpiece. Let's see if I have the now we'll move right along to Franck's chorale number 2. This actually was inspired by a specific piece of Bach that you may have heard. It's called the Passacaglia and Fugue in C minor. Leopold Stokowski made a famous orchestration of that piece, but there's nothing really mysterious about a Passacaglia. It's just a series of variations over a melody that is played in the bass part and remains in the bass part while the variations unfold on top of it. This chorale of Franck uses Bach's Passacaglia and Fugue as a point of departure. There's no way a copy of it at all. It's a completely original piece. It's probably my favorite of the 3 chorales of Franck. It's not as long as the one that we closed the first half of the program with. It is, though, in the key of B minor, and in putting together a program like this, it was a little difficult to avoid too many pieces in the key of B minor, because that apparently is Franck's favorite key, and he writes so many pieces in that key that it would be monotonous to have a whole concert of B minor pieces. But I tried to vary it and have only 3 or 4 in this concert. So let's now listen to the chorale number 2. Thank you. Thank you. Our next piece is a transcription that I made of the final movement from Beethoven's last string quartet. Now, the opus number is 135, and this church recently celebrated its 135th anniversary, so I thought, well, you can't get much more appropriate than that, so I decided to transcribe this final movement. Now, it so happens that this ties in with our Franck celebration because you will hear the first three notes of this Beethoven piece. If you have ever heard Franck's Great Symphony in D minor, it's the same three notes. So Franck borrowed those three notes to construct a 40-minute long symphony. So we have a double tie-in with the 135th anniversary. By the way, there were 135 people at the anniversary service. Who arranged that? I don't know. Anyway, we will now hear this transcription for organ piano duet of what was originally written for two violins, viola, and cello. We have one more piece by Franck. It's his last chorale in A minor, and this was the favorite of Dr. Albert Schweitzer, who, in addition to being a medical missionary, was an organist and a scholar of Bach and Franck. And as I said, the second chorale is my favorite, but this is Dr. Schweitzer's favorite, so I think that's probably a better recommendation.
That concludes our program for tonight. Please come back and join us for another George Nelson concert, or come back on Sunday morning, and you can hear Rudy play again. Thank you.